I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Canada's housing agency says Canada has the highest level of household debt in the G7. The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation says this makes our economy vulnerable to a global crisis. Deputy Chief Economist Aled Abyorworth says in a new analysis that the country's household debt has been rising inexorably. He says high levels of debt do the most damage when a significantly negative economic event happens and leads to widespread job losses. Now, those make it difficult or impossible for many mortgage holders to service their debt. Well, joining us now to discuss Canada's high levels of household debt and what it all means is Dr. Moshe Lander, an economist and professor at Concordia University. Dr. Lander, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello.
So why is Canada's household debt so high compared to its G7 peers?
Well, part of it is that we're allowed to have so much debt, right? Banks at the end of the day are going to approve mortgages or lines of credit or whatever other debt that we're going to take on. And so, if the banks are willing to let us take on that much debt, then it's not surprising that we're going to have that much debt. If it's available, then you're going to use it.
So in what ways are other countries in the G7 managing household debt better than us?
I don't know if it's necessarily that they're managing it better. I mean, part of it too is cultural, right? That in Canada, we don't necessarily have a stigma attached to going bankrupt, right? In fact, sometimes bankruptcy is almost seen as like a badge of honor that when rich people talk about, I went bankrupt 3 times before I hit it big. We just kind of shrug and say, well, good for you. In other cultures, in other countries, going bankrupt is something to be ashamed of. And so, maybe some of it is just cultural that we have a little bit more American in us than we might sometimes care to admit, and we take that as something that's not to be embarrassed by, and so we don't mind taking on so much debt and taking that risk that comes with it.
That's an interesting perspective, Dr. Lander. Now, what concerns does this raise if Canada were to face a global economic crisis?
So, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by crisis, right? I don't know that the world is heading for some sort of disaster. We are heading for a slowdown. I don't know that that would constitute a crisis, but when the economy slows, the issue is, are there job losses that come with it? In your lead-in, we were saying that if you lose your job, hey, it doesn't matter how much debt you have. That's going to be a difficult time to have to pay it back. So, I think that's really the issue that we're watching for right now is there going to be an increase in unemployment with this global slowdown, and how will it affect Canada? If people find it difficult to service their debts, then yeah, you could find bankruptcies or people showing up at the bank saying, I don't know how to pay back.
Now, Mr. Aled Abyorworth, he highlighted a scenario in which a significant number of mortgage holders might be unable to service their debt. That sounds eerily similar to the 2008 financial crisis, Dr. Lander. So, are we heading in that direction at all?
Heading in that direction, sure, but there's a lot of off ramps between here and 2008, and so I don't know that we're going to end up at that final destination. The reality is that yeah, interest rates have gone up, the economy is slowing, the labor market remains strong, which means that there's a record number of people that have jobs. So there's a lot of things that would still have to go wrong. Before we start to find that people are in a position where they can't service their debt and they start to default. Don't forget, too, that in this country, because most of the mortgages are held with a limited number of banks, it's very likely that those banks would look to try and restructure your mortgage and find a way to keep you in possession of your home rather than saying, hand things back. The other thing, too, of course, is that in the US, there's a little more ability to just show up at the bank's doorstep and drop the keys and say, your problem. You can't do that in Canada.
All right, Dr. Lander. Now, meanwhile, in the U.S., we are seeing officials desperately trying to raise the country's debt ceiling. Some saying that the likeliness of the U.S. defaulting before the June 1st deadline is quite high. So, how do you see this potentially impacting Canada and, in turn, household debt levels?
So I don't know that the US is heading for a default. They are probably heading for a shutdown of government, and that would not be good news. But there's a big difference again between shutting down the government for a month until they figure out how to raise the debt ceiling and actually going to a world of creditors and saying, you're not getting your money back. I don't think that the US is foolish enough to hit there. The reality is, though, that financial markets will probably panic on June 1st if there's no agreement to raise the debt ceiling. This could lop some points off of their GDP growth, especially if it's a protracted government shutdown. That's not going to do good things for Canada. But again, does it translate into an economic slowdown here, resulting in big time job losses? If it doesn't translate into job losses, then it's going to be pretty negligible on our economy.
Definitely something to watch for. All right, Dr. Lander, we are out of time, but thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily. All right, Forum Daily Weekend Review will be right back after the break, so stay tuned. Up next, we have an interview with Ms. Sundar Singh to discuss the sex trafficking of international girl students in the Greater Toronto Area. Ms. Singh is also helping some of these girls by providing them with real-world career skills, which assist them in getting out of the sex trade. So stay with us. We'll have more on this up next. The executive director of a women's center in Toronto is sounding the alarm on what she says is the sex trafficking of international girl students in Canada. Sundar Singh from the Elspeth Hayworth Centre for Women says Indian international students in Brampton and the GTA are being targeted by pimps and drug dealers. Ms. Singh says she is also helping some of these girls by providing them with real-world career skills, which assist them in getting out of the sex trade. Ms. Singh joins us now to tell us more. Ms. Singh, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Nina.
So can you walk us through how an international student can be brought into the complex sex trade in Canada, particularly Indian girls, which tend to come from largely conservative backgrounds? How are they targeted and lured into this trade?
Nima, most of the girls that come from India have never left their families before. Many are coming from villages where they are guarded, they're protected, and all of a sudden they land in Canada. It's a big city, Toronto, Brampton, Mississauga, where there's so much to explore and they feel the freedom here. And what they do is they rely on their peers, other international students who have come here. They go to them for advice, and they are very, very active on social media as well. So who's following on the social media are the perpetrators. So as these girls are communicating and they are having a social media conversation with the perpetrators, they find out their weaknesses. They begin to lure them. They act as their boyfriends, and they ask for a date. And once the girls agree to go on date, because girls need companionship, there are no family members here. There are no friends or relatives that they can go to looking for companionship. They willingly go for dates, and during dates they are given expensive gifts and expensive dinners, and until the girl can fully trust this person. The person drives an expensive car. The girls naturally think that expensive car equals that this person could be trusted as well. So once he can win her trust, then gradually he tries to tell her how much she's indebted to him. He's bought her expensive gifts and dinners, etc. So he is now in trouble. So he needs help from her, and he asks for a service for a friend. And if she says no, by this time he's already found out about her family, her parents, where they work in India, where they live, how many brothers and sisters, how much money she has in the bank account. And she sometimes also shares her bank password, which is a huge problem as well. So after she gives out all this information, he now controls her. So if she refuses to serve another man, then he reminds her that her father is in danger, her parents are in danger, and he's already made a video. He's taken photos of her without clothes, and he threatens to send the videos to the family members, and also threatens her that he will put it up in the social media. She will never be able to have a good, sound relationship. From then onwards, she probably can never get married again.
Now, Ms. Singh, we've got a little over a minute left here. We know you've been in the news talking about this growing issue for over a year now. So have authorities in these regions taken any steps to address this growing issue?
The student fees is still very high, 17,000 to 18,000 just for the postgraduate diploma per course, and the students taking 2 courses in a year, that's $34,000. Rent is expensive, 1,000 to 1,600 per bedroom. Last year they could work till for 40 hours. Now they are down to 20 hours per week as well. So the situation is still dire. the students are still facing financial difficulties.
So, from
And
the sounds of it, it seems that these student loans are a really major issue here when it comes to girls being lured into the sex trade to under the promise that they'd be able to pay off these student loans. Just a quick 30 seconds left here, but we know your organization actively works with such victims to reintegrate them into different careers, giving them career skills. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about this initiative here?
yes, trade skills is a huge gap here in Canada. If the government could work with the colleges and the universities and bring that training for the international students, and then put a condition on the students that if they are going to live in Canada, they have to get some training in trade skills. And hence, eventually, we can close that gap.
Up next, an interview with Mr. John Gradek about Canada's new Verified Traveller program and how it will lessen wait times at Canada's largest airports. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back. The federal government has tweaked its Verified Traveller program in order to speed up the process of clearing security at airports. Transport Minister Omar Al-Gabra says the government will launch dedicated security screening lines at 6 of the country's biggest airports between June 7th and 21st. Eligible passengers, including Nexus members, won't have to take their shoes off, and they can keep their laptops and liquids in their bags instead of putting them onto the X-ray conveyor belt. Well, joining us now to unpack the revamped Trusted Traveller program is Mr. John Gradek, aviation expert and lecturer at McGill University. Mr. Gradek, welcome back.
My pleasure, Nima.
So we spoke just a little bit about the new changes to the Trusted Traveller program in our intro, but can you really walk us through these changes in detail and what these new security screening lines will look like for travelers?
Well, what they're doing is really bringing in a program that's been around in the U.S. for, I'd say, close to 10 years. They call it Tsa Pre-Check Program, and one that's been in Europe for a few years already. So we're catching up to a technology and to a business practice that has been around airports for a number of years outside of Canada. So you're creating is really a second stream of lineups for security. The second stream that you're creating is going to be for Nexus card holders, as well as for individuals that are members of the armed forces and police forces, as well as Transport Canada and other officials that are cleared to operate behind the scenes at an airport. So essentially, it's there for Nexus card holders to accelerate their process through security. They've got new machines and new equipment that they're bringing in that has been tested over the last few months in Vancouver and Toronto. They're very happy with the technology as it is. So it should speed up significantly the screening process, both as soon as you undertake screening, and hopefully the lineups for this process will be shortened as well. So it should be an improvement for at least the Nexus passengers.
And we know the government is working on a program that would allow membership without belonging to Nexus. When could we expect something like that to roll out, and what could it potentially look like?
Not sure. I think that, it's going to be an interesting program to see how they're going to deploy equipment. It really is equipment that's a constraint. The technology that they're using to, in fact, scan these Nexus passengers and their carry-on baggage is different than we would have with our normal scanning equipment. In essence, the new equipment gives you a 3D image of your belongings, so you can tell by looking at the image what it is essentially in its dimensions and its content. Whereas the current technology doesn't allow you to do that. It gives you a two-dimensional image, and then you have to go open the bag and pull everything out and see what it is. So it really is an equipment constraint. It's dollars. The Minister Al-Gabra has put in 1.7 billion into the security system. So a significant chunk of that will be going into this new equipment upgrade that we're going to see.
And hopefully this addresses the issue of long lines. Now, meanwhile, we narrowly avoided a strike from WestJet pilots last week, and that could have caused major travel trouble. So do you see more tensions between unions and airlines on the horizon, which could impact travel overall this summer?
I don't think so. I think, I keep hearing all kinds of interesting noises from various players in the industry. I think Toronto Airport was pretty proud of what they did on the weekend in terms of Victoria Day handling. The airports out west did reasonably well. Mother Nature cooperated. The airlines seem to be putting together an operating plan that's kind of reasonable. I'm looking at summer peak. I'm looking at July and August. Will Mother Nature cooperate? The airports are going to be full. The airplanes are going to be full. Will the system be able to handle this significant volume? We're looking for a record summer of travel. There'll be more passengers going through Canada's airports this summer than we've ever had in the past. So it's going to put a strain on the system. I'm crossing my fingers that we're ready. So let's count our lucky stars for now.
We'll see if it could handle the pressure there. Just a quick 30 seconds left here, Mr. Graddick, but where are we at when it comes to efforts to overhaul the passenger rights charter? I know we talked a little bit about it last month when the Liberals proposed some changes to it. Where are we at right now?
They're still under study. They're still trying to put together the dot the I's and cross the T's on that new regulation. I think there's a lot of pushback from the airline industry about what the minister wants to put into those regulations. So the debate is still on between the industry, what the industry can find acceptable, and what the minister thinks is in the public interest. So that debate's still going on. I don't think we'll see much of anything until close to the House being lifted for summer, which is around the end of June.
All right, lots to keep our eyes on. Mr. Graddick, thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Former Governor General David Johnston's move to call for public hearings into foreign interference in Canada instead of a public inquiry is being met with some mixed reactions. Mr. Johnston says he has identified significant shortcomings in the way intelligence from security agencies was communicated to the government. But Mr. Johnston did not identify any instances where the Prime Minister negligently failed to act on intelligence, advice, or recommendations. The conclusions in Mr. Johnston's first report come after all opposition parties called for a public inquiry into foreign interference in Canadian politics. Mr. Johnston's work is expected to continue through the end of October. This is when he is due to present a final report to the government. Well, joining us now to unpack the first report on foreign interference in Canadian politics and what it all means is Dr. Charles Burton, former diplomat to China and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Burton, welcome back to Forum Daily.
It's good to speak with you, Nima.
So can you give our viewers just a quick brief outline of the main points of this first report and any evidence that was found regarding foreign election interference in Canada and how it was handled?
Well, I mean, Mr. Johnston says that there's no need for a public inquiry because he has reviewed all the relevant data, spoken to all of the relevant people, and therefore a public inquiry would be redundant. We should just count on him to tell us what's going on. He says that the reports in the Globe and Mail and Global News have been misconstrued, that in fact there is no basis for saying that the Prime Minister or any of the other ministers of the Crown were in any way negligent or engaged in any malfeasance in not responding to the very serious allegations that have been made in Global News by Sam Cooper and in the Globe and Mail by Bob Fife and Steve Chase. And he will hold these public hearings, but they won't be subpoenaing anybody to appear. It seems that these are opportunities for affected groups to express their concerns to Mr. Johnston, who will take them in and take them into his next report. So essentially, it's sort of nothing to see here. Everyone can move along, trust me. And that's pretty much the end of the matter. As you say, he does feel that there is, as the Prime Minister has said himself, some issues in the the communication of secure classified data that calls some foreign actors into question, and that these are essentially to be resolved through improvements of the bureaucratic process that deals with this kind of thing. So all in all, I think Canadians still don't feel that we have got satisfaction as to the very serious matter of foreign interference in our democratic process, and it appears that we won't be getting that from Mr. Johnston going forward.
And now I want to definitely touch on that issue in terms of the flow of information to Canadians and politicians, which was clearly highlighted. There is an issue when it comes to this. So did Mr. Johnston give us any details on how officials are trying to address the issue of the flow of information?
Well, I mean, he is suggesting that the classified reports are not traceable. You don't know who has read them. They simply give the name of the 17 different security elements in the government, global affairs, BCO, and so on. Based on my experience of dealing with classified information, classified reports are all numbered, and one knows exactly who's read them. So I'm puzzled by this assertion in his report that there's confusion about the flow. And certainly we don't seem to have satisfactory answers with regard to these reports in Global News and the Globe and Mail as to who read them and where they went. The National Security Advisor, Jody Thomas, did directly contradict the Prime Minister and Marco Mendicino, the Minister of Public Safety, who had claimed that CSIS had not moved these documents up because CSIS had felt that there was no need for the political element to read them, and this apparently was not the case, and so she has directly contradicted her boss. I think I think there's still a lot of questions to be resolved, and I don't think that the opposition parties and I think significant elements within the Liberal Party are going to be satisfied with how this is playing out.
And on the note of opposition parties, we know the Conservatives are renewing their call for a public inquiry, and they're calling for a foreign influence registry. How likely are we to see a public inquiry going on ahead, regardless of Mr. Johnston's recommendations here?
Well, I mean, it is possible that the Prime Minister would eventually give in to pressure and appoint someone, a distinguished, neutral person who could subpoena anybody and look at all the documents and, make statements to the public such as they would not reveal the methods of CSIS's intelligence gathering or reveal sensitive sources.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on social media. All right, thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, Canada.